Everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Spencer, and today we're going to be talking about the real-life events that ended up leading to the creation of the movie Candyman. So today we're going to be talking about a lady named Ruthie who lived in a very dangerous apartment complex in the 1987 or the 1980s, and unfortunately what ended up happening to her that led to the creation of the movie. So she had lived in these very dangerous apartments where there was just about a murder every week in these apartments, and unfortunately it had caused her to be really paranoid, and there was a lot of things going on that, you know, in the neighborhood and in the apartments that had her very worried all the time. And she was kind of seen throughout the apartments as this just senile crazy lady that was always worried about somebody coming to get her, or, you know, trying to steal from her, which, I mean, you can't really blame her. I kind of understand where she's coming from with that, but it ended up leading to her being kind of a nuisance in the apartment, and people had recalled seeing her go out to check her mail and constantly complaining about how it's always going to be bad news, and there's always going to be somebody trying to, you know, be out to stealing her money. And she was just very paranoid about life in general. She was this very strange woman, very paranoid, wasn't really very friendly to everybody, and again, can't really blame her. But because of this paranoia and the amount of time that she had spent in these apartments, she started to get kind of nosy about other people staying safe in the apartments. But a lot of people were more worried about her than being kind of crazy than they were the people that lived in the apartments. So one day in 1987, she decided to go into the hallway of this, I think it was 15 stories or something like that, high-rise apartments, and literally with a walking stick in her hand, started walking down the corridor and just trying to open up people's doors by grabbing the door handles and seeing if they were unlocked. And I believe it was either the fourth or fifth door or something like that away from her apartment where she had found an unlocked door, twisted the handle, opened the door, and just walked into this lady's apartment. As I'm sure you would expect, the lady that lived there turns around and is like, "Oh my God, what are you doing in my apartment? Get out, what are you doing?" She starts, she starts yelling at her about, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're leaving your door unlocked. This is ridiculous." Ruthie's just going off and being like, "I can't believe you're being this unsafe," and so on and so forth. And so the lady that lived in the apartment ended up calling the police and were like, "Hey, I need you to come get this lady out of my apartment." A few minutes later, police show up. They're still in there bickering back and forth and kind of arguing. They essentially pull her out of the apartment, and they're like, "Go on about your business. Go back to your apartment. Stop bothering people. You need to knock this off. We're very familiar with you. We deal with you all the time. Go home." And most of the time, she would just do as soon as she was asked, and she would go back to her apartment, and everything would kind of cool back down. Well, because of the fact that she'd been having this declining mental state, she eventually did end up going and trying to get help from a psychiatric department at the local hospital near her apartments. And in doing so, the people that had worked there started to kind of find like a special interest in this lady for the fact that she was, most of the time when she's not paranoid and being, kind of weird, a relatively nice lady. So they told Ruthie, "Hey, we want to try to get you help. We're going to try to send out these applications for these government-led programs that'll kind of help you get back on your feet, or maybe get a little bit of extra money during the month," and so on and so forth. Well, eventually, one of these applications had gotten approved. And so they told her, "Hey, we got this approved." She was supposed to get a couple $1,000s or something like that for the first check, and then a monthly payment for an indefinite time period. But it wouldn't be that exact amount of money. It would just be enough to kind of help her. But she started to realize that with that money, she may be able to move out of these apartments. And her family had recollected that she was really happy about that because her grandkids couldn't visit her in these apartments because of how infamously dangerous they were. Again, there was almost a murder almost every week. And it had gotten so bad, the parents just didn't want the grandkids over there, which is kind of understandable. She would go over and visit with them and play with them and do things like that, but it didn't really feel the same since that was kind of limited. So she ended up getting this approved, and she was really happy about it, and she kind of started getting this new feeling of this like new lease on life. And so she started getting really back into some of the projects that she had laying around. got back into her religious practices, and that's kind of the important part of this story is the religious practices. So because she was in this good mood and she had gotten this money, she was supposed to be saving up to make sure that she could actually move out of the apartments, but she kind of got suckered into those TV programs that would have these pastors and priests go on and talk about sermons then from the Bible and things like that. And unfortunately, because she was looking for kind of all the help she could get, she started getting really infatuated with these priests. And when she really liked one, she would send them letters and try to talk back and forth to them. And because of, the fact that this was before cell phones and things like that, it was more or less just letters through the mail. And of course, when she got a hold of him, she's like, "Hey, I really need your help. I'm tired of being, decrepit, and I want to feel and look younger, and I want to do everything that I possibly can to get back to feeling that way. So I need your help." And of course, they were like, "Oh yeah, we'll help you. We just want you to pay us money first." So she started sending off this money to these priests and things like that to try to get help. And they would send her like pieces of wood and stuff like that that were supposedly supposed to have been blessed that she could have on her bedside table or in the bed with her when she slept, and things like that that would kind of help her start to feel better and look better. And one of the really common things that you would hear from people that would do things like this is that eventually they would wake up one day, go look in the mirror, and all of a sudden they would just look better. Like they would just look better, feel better. And so she got into this routine habit of being able to go into the bathroom and look at herself in the mirror and waiting to see if, when this was going to happen. Well, obviously after so long, she kind of started to feel a little bummed out about it and was like, this isn't working, so on and so forth. And she was coming back from the doctor's office one day, and she was riding the bus, and she had talked to one of her friends, and during this conversation, she had said something to her friend that made her go, "Okay, that's weird." And keeping in mind that she's a little mentally unstable, so she kind of got to take it with a grain of salt. But she had been telling her, that there was some good news, but she had been noticing that when she would go into the bathroom to try to look at herself to see this big difference of, what she looked like and things from these religious programs that she'd be sending money off to, that she was starting to hear whispers, and like there was somebody talking to her. She could hear the voices but couldn't really make out what they were saying. And of course the friend, I'm going to assume, was like, okay, whatever, but told her to kind of talk to somebody about it. And as time progressed, things kind of had gotten a little bit worse with these what were assumed at the time kind of paranoid fits of hearing voices in the background or whatever it was, and was really paranoid about the fact that she thought somebody was after her. And so obviously after a little bit of time goes by, things have started getting a little bit better, and she was really excited about being able to move out of these apartments. And later that afternoon, when she had got done talking to her friend, she had made a call to 911. Now, keeping in mind that this call to 911 wasn't really received all that well, and they didn't really know what to make of it, because when she called, she was yelling about like her cabinets and somebody in her bathroom, or something like that, and like she couldn't really tell where they were coming from, and she was hearing these voices and so on and so forth. Now, when the dispatcher had relayed that to responding officers in the area, they weren't really sure what to do about it, because they knew that she was obviously a little mentally unstable, so they took their sweet time responding to that call. Well, about 20 minutes after she had placed that call, they had gotten another call from one of her neighbors that lived directly next to her saying, "Hey, I was hearing yelling and screaming and somebody hitting the walls, and I'm not really sure what's going on. Can you send somebody?" So this time when the dispatcher got a hold of the officers in the area, they were like, "All right, let's go get this figured out." A few minutes later, they had showed up. They knocked on her door, and nobody was coming to the door. They started asking the neighbors, like, "Hey, did you guys hear anything?" And they were like, "No, we don't know what you're talking about." So they went and they knocked on the door, and they eventually called the dispatcher back and were like, "Hey, can you call that number that she had called from and see if you can get her to answer the phone?" Now, it's reported by the police officers that had responded that day. They could hear the phone ringing through the door, but they couldn't hear much else, and they didn't really know what was going on. But eventually they just went, well, I mean, if she's not coming to the door, we don't want to kick down her door. And the neighbors said they didn't hear anything, so I guess we'll just go back on patrol. So they go back out onto patrol, and of course, you know, it was a little weird that they just didn't respond, but you know, or they weren't able to act on anything. But again, didn't really want to kick in her door, and they couldn't prove if she was or wasn't home, so they just kind of left. Well, the next day, it had been noticed that there was no presence from her whatsoever around the apartments, and one of the people that called her a friend had called the police again and were like, "Hey, I haven't seen her today. I really need you guys to come and check out, you know, what's going on and see if you can find her." So they show up again. They knock on the door. You know, they're not getting a response. Nobody knows what's going on, and so after another few minutes of not being able to get anybody to the door, not really knowing what's going on, they left again. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, her friend was very irritated about the fact that they still just weren't doing anything about the fact that, you know, she was calling and saying that she was concerned for her friend and all this other stuff. Well, eventually she got a hold of the employees for the apartments and said, "Hey, I really need to get in there and see if she's okay. The police aren't doing anything, and I don't know what to do." So eventually they had send up a, I think it was like a maintenance worker or something with a drill, and they essentially took this tool and went straight through the lock and kind of punched the lock out of the door. And there was a statement that was made by the maintenance worker that when he walked in, it was really messy and disorganized and so on and so forth. But the weird thing that stood out to him was that it was mostly empty. Like, it looked like somebody had started to move out and then it just kind of stopped and didn't really keep going. And, you know, it seemed really weird. He didn't really want to be in the apartment. Something felt off about it. But as he goes to walk through the apartment, that's when he finds Ruthie. And unfortunately, she was laying on the floor in her room in a puddle of her own blood. And so, of course, they call 911. The police show back up. At first, you know, they assume it's an open and shut case. Somebody had to have come in, you know, maybe tried to rob her, get some money from her, you know, because they had heard that she'd been getting these, you know, government checks, and unfortunately had killed her in the process. Well, as they're talking to everybody and trying to figure out what's going on and the investigation continues, they had heard the same thing from everybody, and at first they kind of brushed it off, but when they heard the same thing so many times, they eventually went, "You know what? We got to figure this out." Well, as it comes to find out, in the bathrooms of these apartments, you could literally pull the mirror off of the wall, and there'd be this like giant gaping hole in the wall where it went straight in, and you could literally crawl into the wall. So as it turns out, what we think, or well, not what we think, but what they think had happened was that there were people that were kind of crawling in through these walls and able to get into other people's apartments through the walls, because you could take these mirrors out, and they were some of the criminals that would frequent this apartment complex would be able to use that to get into people's apartments. So it's kind of a weird turn of events that something like that's even possible, because you wouldn't think there'd be enough room, but there was. So eventually they figured out that there was two people that had come up through the wall, through her mirror, and attacked her while she was in her apartment. And the call that she had made when she was talking about, you know, there's somebody in my bathroom, but I can't really see him, or, you know, like, you know, I need you guys to send help. It was because there were literally people coming through her mirror to attack her. And as I'm sure you can understand, as somebody who's already really paranoid, that's a freaky situation. So two people had come through the mirror and attacked her, and unfortunately they had shot her 4 times while she was in her apartment. And it is presumed that that did not immediately kill her, and then they went to taking such things like TVs and rocking chairs and things like that and leaving with them. Well, eventually an arrest was made to a 19-year-old that happened to live in that same apartment complex, because he was found with her TV in his apartment. And there was another arrest that was made, but it was kind of hard to prove if they had actually done anything aside from the TV, because so many criminals had been using these walls to get to other people's apartments that they couldn't really prove that it was them. So they did find out what was going on and kind of tried to narrow it down to see if they could actually convict this person of doing it. But like I said, it's kind of hard to when so many people were doing it. And so, unfortunately, it had ended really badly for her, of course. She did end up dying. But the weird thing to me is that when the police had showed up the first time after the racket had been heard, she was laying there on the floor with these bullet wounds, probably bleeding to death, and couldn't make any noise or couldn't get anybody's attention. So if the police would have entered, they would have found her and possibly been able to save her. But because they didn't go in the apartment, unfortunately, she ended up dying that day, and it was because of the gunshot wounds. So it is a really freaky situation, and as somebody who is already mentally unstable and a little paranoid, and constantly yelling at people about keeping their door locked, it's a very unfortunate circumstance that she got attacked literally through a hole in her wall where her mirror was. And that ended up becoming the story for the Candyman horror movie. So, as unfortunate as it is, that is the story for the day. Feel free to like and subscribe to the channel if you guys like this kind of creepy content, as far as how horror movies got to be the horror movies that they are and the stories that originally inspired them. Feel free to go ahead and subscribe and follow my channel. Make sure to turn on all notifications so you can be made aware when I post a new video, and maybe you'll be able to find out something about a horror movie you didn't know. But for right now, that's going to go ahead and do it. And even though it is an unfortunate story and a woman did lose her life, I really hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you guys have a good day. Much love to you. Again, my name is Spencer. Feel free to like and subscribe. Make sure to turn on the notifications so you can always see when I post, and I'll see you guys in the next video.